Well, welcome everybody. This is James Hadlock with Blunovus, and it is my pleasure to welcome everybody to this live panel that's brought to you by the Salt Lake Chamber and the Utah Community Builders and the initiative around workforce resilience through mental fitness. And holy smokes, do I have an A-plus, A-list group with me today. We're going to be talking specifically about leadership and mental health in the workplace. And so I want to just welcome my panelists here. For those of you that are tuning in live, just know that if you've got questions, you can certainly use the chat feature. And one of the things that I just want to be clear about as well is that we may not get to your questions today, but we'll make sure to address those post-event. So let's go ahead and introduce our panel here. I want to introduce first Martha Knudsen. You work with the Utah State Bar. Why don't you tell us just a little bit about yourself and a little bit about what you see? Well, let's wait for that. Okay. Let's just do introductions first.
All right, well, I'm Martha Knudsen. I am the Executive Director of the Utah State Bar's Wellbeing Committee for the legal profession, where we work on preventative well-being initiatives for lawyers, judges, and law students, and we are expanding to everybody in the legal profession.
Yeah, thank you. And then let's go to Analise Wilson with Ivory Homes.
Yep, my name's Analise Wilson. I'm General Counsel for Ivory Homes.
And then lastly, Kelly Lake from Lux Events.
Hi, I'm Kelly with Lux Events and Lux Hospitality Group. We do catering, full-service catering, event planning. We also provide concession and bar services for a wide variety of the live event industry side of things, where you just like to party.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's really interesting because I don't know if our audience is caught on yet, but we have some industry-specific representation today, specifically from the legal industry, from the construction industry, and from hospitality. Now, why in the world would we pick these three industries in particular to talk about mental health in the workplace? Anybody want to guess? Why did we pick these three industries? What's your guess, Martha?
My thinking is that these industries are foundational to the way that business works. We cross lines between different areas that we're in. And I think that each of these industries is, I mean, I know the legal industry touches everything with business and everything with government. And it's, so I think that's why we're involved.
Yeah. What do you think, Annalisa?
My guess is that I think each of our industries have been affected in very different ways by the pandemic. I think especially our two industries. I mean, construction is just absolutely booming, but at the same time struggling with a lot of cost increases that are the result of the pandemic. I know hospitality's been hit hard, and obviously the legal profession, like you said, touches every area. That's what came to my mind first.
Yeah, that's great. And Kelly, and I promise I'm not going to always pick on you last.
You can pick on me however you would like to.
But why do you think it was important to represent hospitality in this type of a conversation?
Hospitality is in a really interesting place right now, not just locally but internationally. We've seen some very pre-pandemic spotlight issues that have really impacted our field, and hospitality is overall is making a huge push toward mental health, good mental hygiene. A lot of that was in response to, sadly, Tony Bourdain's completed suicide, and that was devastating. And it touched people in ways that I don't think any of us saw. So we were already starting to make strides, but again, the pandemic really, really dealt us a different type of blow to the entire hospitality industry. While, as you mentioned, it impacted construction. So construction's like, whew, way up here, hospitality's way down here. It's legal mental health week,
Yes, it is.
Yes, it is.
Weak in the law, yeah.
But we are all three in pressure cooker industries.
Yeah, so let's focus on that very last one. You said that there are 3 pressure cooker industries. So here's what we do know, that although mental health is impacting everybody, these also happen to be 3 industries where there seems to be elevated challenges, right? There seems to be a lot of stigma in these industries as well, right? Of people reaching out and getting the help that they need. And so what I would love to explore with all 3 of you, and we're going to start with you, Kelly, what is the state of mental health in the hospitality industry as a whole? Like, what do you see happening as far as stigma and challenges specifically in hospitality?
If we roll the clock back a little bit, you have the old school, you gotta be tough. You never show pain. You get a cut, you know, you show that bad boy off and you don't flinch. Same with a burn. And that also got internalized to a place where we work some really hefty days. So you work really, really hard, then you party really, really hard, and then you got to get something in you to get going the next day so you can repeat the cycle, which is physically just dreadful, and it obviously requires some chemical assistance to make that part of the cycle work. So we're getting out of that, and then industry-wide, the reality is we make insurance available to our staff. Not everybody is able to do that because insurance is very cost prohibitive in an industry with the type of margins that hospitality has. We're seeing a lot of online support groups. Colorado, for example, has some incredible online support. So we're seeing a lot more peer-to-peer support, peer-to-peer interactions. I was kind of watching an online conversation last night, actually fairly late, with a chef who he had a bit of a hiccup at work, had a total meltdown, is now cooking in a crisis home, but he had reached out to his online group rather than his crisis team because he felt like we would understand better. And he was in really pretty bad shape, and somebody from the group actually ended up calling a crisis intervention team for him. He was in that rough of shape. But this is something that he was having peers literally from basically Alaska to Hawaii, Alaska to Florida, reaching out to him. And this was a conversation that went on for 4 hours online. And it was really heartwarming to see that.
And I'm going to, certainly we want to dig in more around some of the solutions, right, that are industry specific that I know that you've got a lot of insight in. Analise, let's go to you. As far as the construction industry, what do you see are the trends of the challenges? What are some of the barriers that you notice from a cultural perspective, from just a logistical perspective? Like what's going on in that world?
Sure. So I think that just the stereotypical construction worker, you don't think of someone who's out there sharing their feelings, right? I think that historically the culture has been very much keep your feelings to yourself, don't be vulnerable, don't reach out for help. That's going to be perceived as weakness. I am optimistic that that's starting to change. I think that especially the last year and a half has been quite a slog for the construction industry. I mean, we had a little bit of a slowdown last March, but I think everyone's been firing on all cylinders ever since last summer, and there's really no end in sight. I know specifically at Ivory Homes, we've made a big mental health push, and our CEO, Clark Ivory, has been very open that we care about mental health. We want you to take care of your mental health. We're providing Blunovus to our employees as a resource, and I think that is getting through to people. Once we announced that we were offering that service, the construction manager, first thing after the meeting, called me and said, "Can you talk to my superintendents? They need this." So I think that people are recognizing the need and that solutions are out there.
Yeah, thank you. It's really interesting when you think about just construction in general. It really is kind of that tough it out. And, I have one follow-up question for you that occurs to me. Because people are so busy, do you think that there is an added challenge because I know for myself, one of the ways that I dealt with mental illness was, well, I'll just ignore it. And I'll just keep, and I know you're laughing, but again, this is a really interesting conversation with all three of you in your industry, because all three of these industries is like, we're just going to work, we're going to turn it off. What do you see as a way to, well, maybe we get back to that. I want you to think about, but ways that we can maybe address that, because diverting all of our emotions, right, and kind of ignoring those can be problematic.
Absolutely.
So I want you to think about maybe when we come back to you from the construction industry in particular, because it's the heyday, right? It's just amazing what is going on. I mean, I don't know where Utah ranks in construction right now, but we've got to be near the top, right?
Yes.
So I'm really interested, as we explore further, how do we support the industry specifically, because they are so busy? Like, when are they going to even allow themselves to decompress? And I could probably ask that question to all three of you, right? Mm-hmm. And maybe I will. But Martha, let's talk specifically now about the legal industry. What do you see as the biggest challenge, or some of the biggest challenges? Why don't people get help? What has been the landscape over the last several decades in your industry?
Well, so if you think about what lawyers do, what your job skill is as a lawyer, you are required to handle complicated cognitive tasks, to deal with complex issues, to work with clients, colleagues, opposing counsel, sometimes which can be incredibly difficult to work with, and to do all of this under time crunches and sometimes incredible amounts of stress, right? So research tells us that people perform better under these situations when they are thriving. But traditionally, as a profession, the legal profession has, the approach has been that your well-being is your own business, handled on your own time. And the only time that the profession gets involved or interested is when the wheels come off the bus. And so the approach to mental fitness has been very reactive instead of preventative. Mm-hmm. And because of that, we see, like, there was a big landmark piece of research that came out for, like, it was over 19 states and over 13,000 attorneys in 2016 that showed highly elevated states of depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, and substance use. And then we replicated, through our work with the Wellbeing Committee at the bar, that study with Utah lawyers with data collected prior to the pandemic. And what we found in Utah is that 44% of Utah lawyers have some level of clinical depression, from moderate to severe. 44% are burned out. And we are seeing that if you're a lawyer in Utah, you're 8.5 times more likely to have feelings that you'd be better off dead or of hurting yourself. Mm. And if you look at the risk of that, that is, you're more likely to be a lawyer in Utah and have suicidal ideation than smoking and getting lung cancer. So that is what the climate has been. Mm. But we're seeing that shift. And since the time that I came into, when I shifted from practicing law into working at the intersection of well-being and the law, which has been about, 6 or 7 years, I have seen a pretty remarkable shift. Where when I first started doing this, people were like, "Why we don't need well-being? What, like, why don't we care? You just put your head down and work." And so now we're starting to see, like, yeah, we have to take care of ourselves, and we need to do it proactively, because it's way easier to keep the cow in the barn, right? And especially with the pandemic, as difficult as the pandemic has been for all of our industries, right? I think it's also had a silver lining in the sense that at least in the legal profession, it's like, yeah, we get it, because if people aren't well and if they're struggling, they aren't going to be able to show up and do the work that they need to do, plus the fact that like it's the right thing to do to make sure that our colleagues are flourishing.
Well, boy, there's so much to unpack here. But a couple of things that stand out, I think across the board, not just in your industries, but I think across the board, mental health has become so prevalent in people's awareness that, and people are still choosing to ignore that,
Yes.
right? But for the most part, at least there's been this light that's been shining on, there is a need, and I'm gonna go to what you just shared. There's a need to be proactive. Like, yes, we've got to have things in place downstream, right?
Absolutely.
So we've got to address the crisis and when things happen. But I really want to turn the light on to this idea of moving upstream and being more proactive. And listen, I've been shouting that from the rooftops for several years. What does that mean? Like, when you hear, what does it mean to be proactive? And I want you to talk about it specifically from your profession. Like, what would it look like, or what does it look like today to be proactive as it relates to mental health in the workplace? And I'm going to go with Annalisa first.
Thanks,
On the
James.
spot.
I'm just thinking about the construction industry specifically. I think that they have a good track record of incorporating safety. I'm probably 30 years ago, we would be shocked about some of the things that went on in construction sites, but now there are lots of regulations, and the industry as a whole has really bought into that safety is important and that everyone's going to comply. We're going to have safety logs, and it's just second nature now. And so for our industry specifically, I think that's a way that we can be proactive, is creating that same culture around psychological safety and making that a priority too. Because we already have that buy-in in regards to physical safety, I think that it's possible to just widen that circle and also get the same buy-in and same acceptance regarding the importance of psychological safety.
You know what I love about that is that seems so doable because we have a model already, right? Safety trainings. So I just out of curiosity, how much safety training is required in the construction industry?
I know with our teams, we have monthly trainings, and then the logs are always being kept 24/7. It's just something that's standard, that's second nature, that we almost take for granted now because it's so much a part of the culture that you've got to be safe on the job site.
So it's automatic. Mm-hmm. So you're not saying necessarily that it's required, but it's just an automatic part of your culture to provide safety training. So my question is wouldn't it make sense to just literally plug and play with psychological safety in very much the same way?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that is an actionable. If you are in the construction industry, consider, like, if you're doing a lot around safety, wouldn't it make sense to start providing trainings the very same way and in giving people a better understanding of what psychological safety even means? Some people may not even know what that is. So I'm going to say it's another way to say really fancy to how do you build trust? How do you build trust with people in a way? And let's talk about that for a minute. And I'm fine with anyone kind of jumping in here because this is a great launching pad. Why is it important to provide psychological safety in the workplace? Like, what is that all about?
I just love the phrase psychological safety. I think that's fabulous. I think it sounds so much better than, there's a lot of stigma still attached to the whole concept of good mental health or getting support for mental health. And our culture has so many phenomenal things about it. It also has very much this either spoken or unspoken, you're expected to kind of excel and never to fail. And that's very prevalent regardless of any industry you're in. And, but if you can frame it as safety, versus anything else. I love that. That's beautiful.
Yeah, and Kelly, what I love about what you just shared is mental health and incorporating that in the workplace is a cultural initiative. It's not just a mental health initiative, is it?
It's very much bound up in the way that we interact with each other, and it's bound up in the way that we go about our work every single day. And so I think when people think about mental health or mental fitness, what comes to mind for a lot of people is like, oh, well, I got to go to yoga, I've got to meditate, I've got to exercise. And those things are really important and lovely. But for what we're talking about with psychological safety and the different things that can really help people be resilient, it is how do we interact with each other on a day-to-day basis when we're giving an assignment or when we're talking about, like for example, with the legal profession, when you're talking about a case, how do you talk to each other? What's leadership like? It could be just things simple like if you're in an office, do people know your name? Do they like make eye contact when they see you? Are you using your strengths every day? Do you feel safe enough to be like, I don't understand this? Does it feel okay to try something and fail? And those are small little shifts that don't take a ton of time, but it just takes some training and learning how to find a new way to work. And I think that is a hurdle to overcome with people, is just to get out of our normal ways of working, shift a little bit, and it can make a huge difference over time. It's small shifts over time.
Well, and let's put that in loud large letters, that these are simple steps that each one of us can take. I think oftentimes there's this idea that, oh my gosh, it's this huge mountain for us to trek over, right? And what you're saying is that with just some small little shifts, and I heard you say training again, that seems to be kind of a theme here. Yeah. And I want to come back to why is psychological safety like the ultimate proactive approach to addressing mental health in the workplace?
From my perspective, I think it tackles some of the issues of feeling like stigma, right? With lawyers especially, I think, Annalise, you can speak to this, is there's this idea that you are supposed to be perfect, that you're supposed to never screw up, that you don't ask for help, that you are tough, and you just put your head down and gut it out. And that can work for a while, right? But then you break down. And so being able to say to somebody, I need help, I don't know this, can you help me? We all need help sometimes. Nobody goes from zero to hero in like a second. And I think that also it's important to have some level of vulnerability to be able to say that you're struggling. Everybody does, right? I mean, that is certainly something I struggled with. When I was in my third year of law practice in a law firm, I was starting to feel depressed and anxious. And there's no way in hell I was going to tell anybody about that, because that was not the culture that I could go and say, I'm really stressed out all the time and I'm struggling. So, right? Like if I could have just done that, it could have made a huge difference. And then there's just this culture of sometimes with the law, I think is changing in other industries, that you're just supposed to know that if you make a mistake, that is a condemnation on who you are, instead of just you're growing, you're learning. So, I mean, I could go on and on about that, but I think it's so important for especially young people entering into a new industry to be able to feel that they can learn, they can grow, and it's okay to struggle.
Well, let's kind of enmesh a little bit about what you've all been talking about here on being proactive. How does that relate to psychological safety? Mm-hmm. You brought up another word that has got to be one of the scariest words in the legal industry. You know which word?
Failure.
Vulnerability.
Vulnerability,
yeah.
yeah. Well, failure too,
Failure.
but it goes with that vulnerability, right? Like, but that's kind of a scary word for just about everybody at first, mm-hmm. right? So help me connect the dots on how can we be proactive? how do we integrate psychological safety in the workplace, and how do we create a culture where it's okay to be vulnerable? It's okay to not always be on my game. It's okay to fail. Because here's what's really interesting. If you follow, the Gary V's of the world, or you think of the Elon Musk of the world, like if you really look at it, those guys have failed a ton. And we celebrate that on the outside, but when it comes to each of us personally, like that's the last thing we want to even kind of entertain, right? So what are you guys hearing in that?
I'm just loving this conversation. We have a person at work whose job title is, she's in charge of employee development. She's our HR person, she's our everything person, and she creates and conducts our manager and leadership trainings. And so she's created a mentorship program. She just set all of the entire managing partners included, down and made us practice our listening skills so that we would be safe for people to come to. Things like that. She's great at that. She's phenomenal at being proactive. One of my very, very proudest ever mementos from a staff member, from a team member, is we have we call it a Lux Bucks program. They're little award vouchers anybody can give to anybody. And I've got one that's been on my bulletin board for a couple of years, and it's from a former team member. We're hoping she comes back to us. She left for Moab during the pandemic, and I want her back. She was having some anxiety, depression, high anxiety struggles, and most of us know how to do some grounding, centering exercises in case of bad moments on the floor, bad moments in the kitchen, whatever. And I walked her down a few times, talked her down a few times, and she gave me something. She gave me a little thing, to Kelly, in recognition of something along the lines of not losing my mind in the face of an employee losing their mind. And I love that. But we practice it. We practice listening. And if we don't listen correctly, our person in charge of employee development calls us out, and she calls us out fairly sternly on it.
Accountability.
I like that. Thank you very much. Annalisa.
What came to mind when you asked, how do we connect these dots? And I think the place you have to start is just breaking down the myth that weakness equals vulnerability. Or the vulnerability equals weakness. I always tell my kids when they say they're scared when we're going to do something new, I always say, great, then you have a chance to be brave. And that bravery we define in our family as being scared and doing it anyway. And if you take that approach that you can't have courage without vulnerability, then you make vulnerability equal strength, because everyone wants to be brave, right? I think that in the practical way that translates to the workplace is that you're okay making mistakes, like you said. If perfection is your culture, then it's not the right thing for anyone, because your employees are going to have high anxiety. They're not going to feel like it's a psychologically safe place, and they're also not going to take risks and go after stretch goals. So you're going to be very stagnant. But if you can create that culture of vulnerability, and your culture is, this is a brave thing to do. It's brave to go outside of your comfort zone. And we understand that there's necessarily going to be risk associated with being vulnerable. You're putting yourself out there. But we're going to welcome that, because this is a place of growth and a culture of growth. And not only are you psychologically safe, because we're going to be okay if you fail, we're going to support you, but the company as a whole, it's best for them too, because then you're growing and you're going to be more successful.
Yeah, Martha, any other comments about that?
Yes, so many comments. But, well, I will say that I think a wonderful place to focus that's important is leadership. Especially, with any kind of an industry, and I see it especially with the legal industry, is that we need leaders that can model the behavior and the support that we know, that's evidence-based, that we know helps us all feel psychologically safe, succeed, and have higher motivation. Like there's not a ton of research on lawyers, but the research that we do have is done through the frame of a incredibly well researched and established construct called the self-determination theory, where they look at if you have 3 psychological needs that are met, and over all these thousands of studies across all sorts of industries, they find that we all have them, that we need to feel like we are connected or that we belong, that we need to feel like we have autonomy, which doesn't mean being the boss of yourself. It means like that you're doing something volitionally because you feel like it connects with your own values and goals, and that you feel like you have mastery or competence. And so if we have leaders and we teach lawyers, I'm talking about my industry here, to be leaders, and these are not just the heads of firms. I think every lawyer is a leader in some way for their clients, with their staff. If we teach people how to connect or how to be better leaders and to connect with how do you be autonomy supportive with your colleagues, how do you make people feel like they belong in the workplace, it's little small shifts, and how do you mentor others, and how do you build the self-efficacy of others? Because that's a big thing, I think, for success. If you feel like if you make a mistake, then that's it for you. Mistakes are part of growth, right? But if you you have a mentor or somebody else that can help you build your self-efficacy, for example, so you can look back on, wow, how far have I come from the day that I first started working, and how scary that was, and now it's like no big thing, and you learn these things. If we have leaders that know how to do that, I think we can really build the well-being and the performance and motivation of our people. And that's those 3 needs being satisfied, the studies we have on lawyers show that is incredibly important to their satisfaction with work and their performance.
Well, I'm a big fan of self-determination theory.
So
in fact, it's where a lot of the inspiration for the work we do comes from.
Nice.
And you talk about autonomy, you talk about people feeling like they belong, and it reminds me too when we're talking about giving people permission to take risks and fail. When you bring that into the context of your emotions, like giving people permission to have a bad day. Like one of the things, and this was totally on me, but I remember back in the day, I was Mr. Positivity. I'm pretty positive these days too. But if I had a down day, my entire staff were like, is everything okay? Like it was crisis moment just because, but here was the thing, I was over the top all the time. Like I never gave myself a break to just even be average with my emotions. And so when you start to put all of this together, and I love, you just seem to be segueing us into one of the other things that I would love to cover and really explore with all 3 of you is, what is the role of leadership as it relates to being proactive around mental health in the workplace? Annalisa, what are your thoughts about that?
I think that probably the first step is just establishing care and connection with your employees. If people don't feel like you genuinely care about their well-being, then they're not going to share anything with you. And I'm not saying that you have to tell them everything about your personal life. I don't think that that's necessary for vulnerability. But just bringing your whole self to work, being a human, letting them know that you do have bad days sometimes. And maybe saying, yeah, I do have a stressful thing going on at home, and maybe depending on what type of person you are, maybe you share more, you share less, whatever's authentic for you. But just going back to however is authentic to you, establishing care and connection so that when the time comes that they need help, they know that you're someone that cares about them and that they're welcome to talk to you.
So, you said something there that I think is really key for leaders in particular to hear. Vulnerability doesn't mean that you have to break down, like, okay, so when I am being authentic and vulnerable, like I cry, but that's just who I'm owning who I am in the moment. But not everybody is like that, right? And so it's not modeling someone else that is being vulnerable, it's you being authentic. So I love that you brought that into the conversation. It's showing up and just being yourself, right? And owning that in the moment. So I really love that. Kelly, what are your thoughts?
I loved what Annalise was saying earlier about the culture of perfection versus a culture of not perfection. Because if you're creating a culture of mandated perfection as a leader, you are absolutely not creating a culture of growth. You can't, if you're perfect, you're not going to grow, because why would you? You're already there. And in terms of vulnerability, I'm going to guess there has not been an employee through our doors in the past 30 years who has not seen me have some pretty shaky moments. Most of them have seen me in tears. Most of them have seen me really happy. Most of them have seen me someplace else. But, you know, we go through the doors, we love our people, we say hi to them, we make eye contact. If they have a problem, they know who they can go to, but they also know that they know who they should go to if it's work-related, but they also know that everybody's available to them. And if there's somebody in a management or leadership role that is not available to them, then we have done a poor job of selecting somebody to fill those leadership shoes. And we need to reevaluate that, because our people are who we are. And if we're not available to them, and we're not allowing them to grow, and we're not supporting them in their good moments and their bad moments, kitchens are, hospitality itself, it's unique. It's a family. And there's a reason that we refer to the walk-ins as the crying room. It happens. People go to the refrigerator and cry. But yeah, it is like you get battle hardened together. It's like kind of like a baby troop of soldiers. There's a reason the French called it the brigade system as they were developing, because it was based very much on a military system. And so you're in the trenches and you become family.
Isn't it interesting that with all three of the industries that we've been representing today, that the culture has been almost this automatic, stoic, gotta suck it up, no failure, right? This very stringent type of culture. And yet what I'm hearing today are words like vulnerability, authenticity, genuine concern, connection, caring for each other. Who wouldn't want to work in that? Like, especially with, bringing it back to the pandemic and everything that we've navigated, and challenges for different reasons in all three of your industries, and frankly, challenges across the board, right? When you think of people who are trying to figure out how to manage kids at home, and who's vaccinated, who's not, what are the rules now, what are they going to be in the future, am I going back to work full time, am I going to work from home? Like, there's so much unknown, and newsflash for anyone who's tuning in, that's always been the case, right? We've always lived in the unknown, for real. And so what would be some of the things, Martha, like, let's move into talking about other solutions, because I know we've mentioned them. And again, I want to just point out, leaders modeling this, would we all agree is required? Like,
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
What else comes to mind?
So I'm going to tell you what else comes to mind, but I have one thing I should need to say to my lawyers out there is, when we're talking about connection and vulnerability, this does not mean that you need to hug and brush each other's hair. That is not what we're talking about. And it is just about those small, and it doesn't mean you need to be besties with people you work with, but it's those small micro moments of connection every single day. Eye contact. If somebody comes into your office, look up from your computer and give them your attention for 30 seconds. Smile. Know somebody's name. So, but I just, because I know there's lawyers out there watching that might be freaking out, thinking that suddenly you're going to have to cry with your colleagues. That's not what we're saying. It's just like, show some connection. And so the next steps, I would say, for the legal profession, it's really about being proactive. And it is, so we spend so much time training our skills, training our knowledge in the law, training how to argue, training how to work with clients. We really should also be adding into that learning how to be well, learning how to work and interact in ways that that not only buffer against some of the occupational hazards that we face, but are also scientifically shown to increase our performance, to reduce attrition, and to increase extra role behaviors in commitment to the organization that you're working in. Things that actually make your brain work better, your memory work better. And that's the stuff about well-being isn't just about feeling good, it's about doing well in your work. So I would say, and this is something that I advocate for when I speak to lawyers, that I advocate for, that my committee that I work on, Justice Peterson and Cara Tongaro are the co-chairs, that we advocate for, is we should be binding these skills up with the skills of practicing law. And I think that is really the next step. And it's something that, again, it doesn't need to add hours and hours to your day. It takes a little bit of training, and then you just shift a little bit the way that you are working, the way that you're interacting, and the recovery you take both during the day at work and when you're not at work.
Yeah, that's lovely. And you know, what I find really interesting about what you're talking about is we're really talking about just integrating and overlaying into the trainings we're already doing, right?
Yes.
Like there is training required in just about every job, like every job. So just a few tweaks to whether it's onboarding or manager training or whatever it is. Like this is something that is very doable. I mean, would you two agree with that? And what are your thoughts?
You know, I'm not sure I'm hearing anything that isn't good manners and empathy. And somehow the climate has shifted a little bit to make it more acceptable to have your bad manners on display. And I think that would be something that hospitality and construction shares, and attorneys as well. I think we mostly deal with good people, but I think the people who aren't quite as kind are feeling a little bit more emboldened to be more confrontational. So our frontline workers are dealing with that, and it's not fun for them. So we're saying to our teams, we need you to model the kind of behavior you want reflected back at you, and we're going to show you how to do that by being kind and empathetic and displaying good manners ourselves, but you're not always going to get that back. And that's a hard thing.
I agree with you, and I think I'd go beyond that as well. Those are capacities and strengths that we can build, and with modeling, with leadership training, with modeling behavior with other folks, but it's also things like understanding, like stress, right?
Yeah.
That's something that goes with all three of our industries, and that's not going to change. Stress is a thing in life, right? And stress, everyone's all freaked out about stress, but stress itself is not a bad thing. It's growth. It's a biological adaptive process that allows us to meet the moment and learn. The problem is we get in stress and we stay in stress. And so you can teach people how to recover, how to come back to baseline. And you can teach people skills and capacities that means that you're still going to be stressed, but you can only stress to here instead of to here. And like goal setting skills and how to deal with difficult people sometimes with the relational things. There's all sorts of different capacities that people don't typically think as well-being capacities, right? But they really do impact how we interact with the stresses of the workplace.
Yeah, Annalisa?
What I was thinking of when you asked your initial question, I mean, what are the solutions above and beyond just, generally trying to change culture and improve leadership? I think with the construction industry, whatever solution it is, it has to be convenient. A lot of these people are out in the field, and especially looking at just our company specifically, Ivory Homes, we have people that work in the office and people that work in the field. So we actually had some breakout groups at the beginning of the year talking about well-being, and we got a whole bunch of different people together and said, what do you want? What are you interested in? And it was hard to find a one-size-fits-all just because everyone's roles are so different. And so we looked at different solutions of how can we reach someone who's sitting in the office and also reach someone who's sitting in the field or on a construction site. So that's why we like the Blunovus approach, in that you can text someone. It's not, you don't call and make an appointment with a therapist for 3 weeks from now, giving that immediate support. Externally is always helpful, and then obviously internally having that culture where you can call or text your manager and immediately have that connection without having to drive an hour or take time out of your workday to address those needs.
Well, I think that is maybe one of the things that we ought to pay attention to is it's got to be simple, it's got to be practical, it's got to be easy. I mean, that's just human nature, right? That's what we're looking at. And we tend to make some of these issues so convoluted and so confusing and complicated, right? But everything that we're talking about today is not, like, none of this is revolutionary, right? It's putting some awareness around it, and then talk about being able to fit some of these things specifically in the culture of the legal industry, et cetera. Like, do you know what I'm asking?
I do. So I know lawyers push back a lot when we talk about well-being, because they're like, okay, well, me having to do well-being now is stressing me out because it's adding all this to my to-do list. And that's the point. Like, it doesn't really need to add to your to-do list because you do it while you're working. For example, one of the things that we teach is a construct called HOPE, but it's really about targeted goal setting. And it's something that helps you manage your stress, and you're doing it while you work. And so this is something that it just changes a little bit how you work. And it's learning that if you have a challenge in front of you, can you break it down into smaller pieces? And with each of those pieces, you think about, all right, what are all the different pathways to that goal? And so you think about that, and you're like, what are the obstacles that could get in the way? And then, how do you get around those obstacles? So when they inevitably happen, it's not going to take you from your stress level here to here and off the rails, right? It's just the way of managing a case. And it's just a simple shift from here to here that over time, that little small shift can have a big impact, not only on your stress levels and well-being, but on your performance. So it takes just a little bit of time to learn how to do that, some modeling by a leader, and then you just do it while you're already at work.
Yeah, what are your two thoughts around some of these simple, practical solutions? Is there anything else that comes up for you? Anything else you want to share?
Staying hydrated. I mean, that sounds so insane, but quite literally, when we're outside, it's July, we've got 100 people running around, they're getting crazy, like almost literally, you're starting to see behavior, you're starting to see a lot of energy, and not always the kind you want, you're starting to see a lot of emotion. And oftentimes there is a straight up need for a pre-K teacher to say, hey, time out, everybody, it's Gatorade time, water time, whatever. That physical, teaching everybody to be aware of what does it feel like, what does it look like physically when that stress level is creeping up. And physically, what are some things that we can do to moderate that? Does it look like you need to go slam 16 ounces of water right now before you say another word to me? Because that's also sometimes a conversation, and sometimes it does happen in that tone of voice. Kitchens are rough. Construction sites are rough. But sometimes it's like, okay, I need you to sip some water and take a couple of deep breaths, roll your shoulders. What's happening? I see that your eyebrows have snuck up into your hairline. Yeah. Can you relax your face for me? What does it look like and feel like physically as well as inside?
I think you're looking at recovery, right? Those little moments of recovery during the day.
Yeah.
That is important for all of us.
Because we do it from the pastry kitchen world. We have stretches that we do so that we don't wreck our wrists. So what do we do so we don't wreck our brains?
Yep.
So, what I'm hearing in my head, like what's rattling around is self-care. And this is a great conversation to have, because at the beginning of our presentation today, we were talking about how we're all so busy, we don't have time for anything. Talk to me about self-care.
One thing that came to my mind during this conversation is the importance of interacting with your colleagues, not necessarily 100% focused on work. I mean, yes, I think crying together is wonderful, but I also think laughing together is wonderful. Going out to lunch, and I have a bunch of stupid stories of stupid things I've done, and I can laugh at myself and everyone else can laugh at me, and that's so important because it's vulnerable in a way, but it's also fun and it's relaxing, and just having that downtime where you're spending time together, even if it's just 15 minutes around the water cooler, laughing about something. I think that boosts mental health, it boosts connection, it boosts camaraderie. So just taking that time to, I mean, it can make you more productive too, but 5 minutes away from work just to enjoy each other as humans can really go a long way.
I love that. It's that building positive emotion by having the connection and laughing and having a little bit of play built into your day, I think is so important. When you look at resilience to stress, a lot of that is, it's not just, I think we have a misconception that resilience is that you put your head down and grind it out. But no, it's really working really, really hard and focus in spurts and then recovering. And you need to do that during the day. So it is humor, right? Connecting with other people. It could be switching from one task that uses one part of your brain to a different task that uses a different part. Standing up and moving. I think movement's so important, like hydrating, right? So it's just breaking up your day and learning how to do that in ways that makes you more productive. And then you're also caring for your brain and your body. And the more positive emotions you can build during the day, you're just going to be, it's not just, doesn't just feel good, but it actually, science shows, it makes us more creative. It makes us, so we can connect better, and it helps us handle stress, all those things. So I love what you both said about all that. That's awesome.
You know, it reminds me, one of the things we did here with our organization is we were doing a Zoom call with our teams, and we asked the question, what's one of the most embarrassing moments of your life? And let me tell you, I have never cried and laughed so hard. And here was the other thing, it's such a simple thing, but going back to simplicity, right? We did that game around what's the most embarrassing moment of your life. I got to know everybody else on a different level too. So connection came in, that laughter, but seriously, I was crying because some of it, I mean, it was so, there was a lot of cringe in there too, trust me. But it was so fun to get to know my colleagues in a little bit of a different way. So what I'm hearing is, don't always make it about work, connect, put in some humor, take care of yourself. You know, this kind of goes down that road of being a little bit more mindful about what your needs are. What would you say about that? Anyone? Anyone?
I would say, well, I of course have something to say about that. I think that if you want, in all of our industries, right, we take care of other people. It's a service industry. And if you are going to be at your best to take care of others, you have to be able to take care of yourself. It's that whole thing in the airplane where they tell you that the bag comes down, put the oxygen on yourself first. Don't feel guilty about taking care of yourself, because that is what's going to allow you to be the best that you can be for the people that you serve. So I think it's incredibly important, but it can be hard because a lot of us get into these industries because we are givers. We want to help other people. We're problem solvers. And so we give and give and give and give and give until we can't give anymore, and then, that's when we see problems.
What do you two think around mindfulness? Anything else come up for you?
I think it's something that I'm still working on. I think a lot of people are still working on it. I don't know if I have anything specific to the construction industry to add, but I can certainly speak from a working mom that that's something that's difficult to do, to prioritize your needs. But I 100% agree that it's important, and it's something I'm learning.
I was having a conversation with our community outreach police officer and a woman who's been very instrumental in helping with some of the homeless situations that are happening in Salt Lake. And both of them, we're all kind of tired, but both of them looked so exhausted, and I asked them both, I said, when was the last time did you guys eat today? And both of them answered, well, yeah, we had a cup of coffee. And this was like at 6 o'clock at night. And I said, okay, no, you need to stop for a minute. I've got granola bars or something in the car. I mean, I'm that person, I have snacks. And they just kind of laughed at me, and I'm like, I am very, very serious. So the officer I was speaking with, I know his workload is really, really rugged. Police are, regardless of what side of the coin you come down on that, police are having a tough time right now. My friend that's out on the streets daily in the homeless camps, she's having a hard time. And they both are consistently forgetting to take care of themselves. And they are just giving huge chunks of themselves away daily. And their wells are running dry. And if they don't let those wells at least fill partially back up, there won't be anything left for them to give. So they need to take that moment to have more than just the cup of coffee and piece of toast. They've got to take a minute to breathe. They've got to take a minute to take care of themselves. And they get going so busy and they're so focused on helping everyone that they're not even aware of their own needs. They're not aware that they're hungry. They're not aware that they're exhausted, that they're not aware they're in pain until 2 hours after they get home at night.
Mm. As we start to wrap up, yeah, believe it or not, we are coming to time. What would be, like, if I want you to just think for a moment and just reflect on if there is, and I want you to speak specifically to leaders of industry in each of your areas of expertise. What would you want, like, what would be that final takeaway, whether it's been something you've said already or something you want to bring into the conversation? Let's wrap up by talking to the leaders of these industries. What would you want them to know as it relates to being proactive around mental health in the workplace?
That I would say that the well-being of your people is imperative, not just because it's the right thing to do, but because if you want your organization to have high performers, if you care about the bottom line, well-being is the right thing to do, and it's something that we need to be taking care of proactively. It's an important thing. Lawyers need it. It's good for your lawyers, it's good for your clients, and it's good for the bottom line.
Well said. Thank you.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. I think what I would add on top of that is I would just recommend communicating that priority to your workforce, verbalizing it. You can set an example, and absolutely leaders should set an example and try to create that culture. But by verbalizing it as a priority, that's going to bring more awareness to it. And I think that everyone will be surprised how many people echo that sentiment and that it will be best for the employees and the company.
And I would say be aware of resources that are available that are industry specific. There are myriad resources available. If you're still trying to run that old school, extremely hostile workplace, step back, take a minute, educate yourself, and be kind. Be aware that your business, your organization is going to be exactly as successful as you allow your people to be. This isn't coming from a place of a bleeding heart. This is coming from, yes, I very deeply care about my people, but I also care about my bottom line. And it's much, much, much less expensive and much more profitable when you're running on tight margins to solve at the ground floor than it is to solve at the 100th floor. So take care of it early and be aware of what's out there to support your people.
Well, I want to give a big shout out to all three of you. Thank you so much for showing up and really bringing so much passion and some clarity to how we can start to better address mental health in the workplace. I also want to reach out and say thank you to the Salt Lake Chamber for sponsoring and bringing this event to all of you. Here are a list of other sponsors that have participated in the Workforce Resilience Initiative, with the Salt Lake Chamber and the Utah Community Builders Foundation. If you have questions, if you want to reach out, we don't know, we weren't able to see if there was some chatter going on, but if there was, we'll make sure to get back to you and respond to some of those questions that you may have had. But until next time, remember everybody, to listen up, settle in, and connect on. Goodbye, everybody.